Challenges of Hospice, and we're going to start our program tonight, learning how to write an obituary. So, I see you have pens in hand, and you have a whole bunch of literature in front of you. So, without further ado, Kate, well.
All right, so I will try to project even more than last time. My name is Kate. I am the Hospice Grief Services Coordinator at our local hospice. I am certified in thanatology. I do believe it was you that figured out what thanatology means? No, not you? Does anyone know what thanatology is? The study
Say the word again.
Thanatology.
X-A-N or T-H-A-N?
T-H-A-N.
From the Greek. Can you spell it? Can you put it in a sentence?
Use it in a sentence.
I am certified in thanatology. So thanatology is the study of death, dying, and bereavement.
Oh.
There's your fun fact for the evening. I definitely didn't grow up thinking that I was going to get certified in death, but here we are. I love my job, and this presentation that I give is one of my favorites. I read a lot of obituaries for the work that I do, and some of them are absolutely amazing. So this is going to give you kind of a background look at where the concept of the obituary came from. It will give you an idea of what most people choose to include in their obituaries, which is a biographical sketch. But then we'll talk about how to make it fun, because this is your lasting tribute to the world. Maybe it is the gift that you're giving the person who has died, but it doesn't have to just be the black and white facts, right? Because that's a little mundane. We're looking for more fun stuff. We have more copies of the PowerPoint coming, because there are far more people here than I anticipated.
I told you.
So that is exciting. I was wrong. At your tables, there should be 4 or 5 little note cards. One side is blank and the other has writing on it. That is simply because I am reusing them. So we only need the blank side. And what I would like all of you to do, and you do not have to share the information after, but what I would like all of you to do is write down 3 adjectives that you would describe yourself as. Preferably positive adjectives. So my 3 are witty, adventurous, and compassionate. 3 adjectives, words that describe you. It's okay, I don't remember either, so I won't look at it. All right, what you have is probably good enough. Does anyone want to share some of their 3 adjectives or all of theirs? Yes.
I will share all of mine.
Of course.
Do you expect anything less?
No.
Irreverent, curious, and empathetic.
Those are good. That's a record. That's a good one. What else we got in the room? Yes, Liz.
Responsible, adventuresome, and kind.
Perfect. What else? Anybody else? Yes.
Thoughtful, energetic, and analytical.
Ooh, analytical. That's a good one.
Caring and dedicated.
Very good. Do you think that people in your life would also use those words to describe you? Do you think they'd think to put those words in your obituary? If you think those words describe you and you picked them, now is your opportunity to pass that information along to whoever is going to write your obituary, or gives you a starting point to write your own. It's not easy to think of words that describe us, but if you start with something very simple like this, it can at least give you a jumping off point. So that's why we start with this. Also, I like to know where the irreverent ones in the room are, so I can be prepared. In your PowerPoint, so the handout with the multiple pages, you are going to be able to follow along with what I review. You'll notice that there are little speech bubbles throughout the PowerPoint on various pages. These have quotes in them from actual obituaries. And if we need more copies, I can email the library more copies and they can print them for you. But we're going to start at the beginning. Obituaries have been a part of human history since early Roman times. Usually, though, this was mostly for the deaths of noble people. So you saw a lot of obituaries for males in the past, and over time, slowly but surely, it included more than just noble males. It included nobility in general, and then it progressed from there. Obituaries used to be, and still sometimes are, a form of news. So what's going on? Who's dead? When did they die? Where did they die? How did they die? The bubble on this history slide is a very early obituary from, I think it was 1919, and it gives very specific details as to where Mrs. Hearn died. We don't typically see that anymore, but I guess if you wanted to put it in there, that would be okay. Part of why we don't see this anymore is because, in general, our community is much more well-connected, so we don't really need to know where people live. The other part of why we don't usually put that much detail into where people live is for safety reasons, because we don't need the general community knowing that Mrs. Hearn's house is standing empty. So part of that has been a safety concern. The other part is it's just not really necessary. I can tell you that in Venice, Italy, there are, has anyone been to Venice? Oh, teeny tiny streets that just dead end into canals. It's very confusing. And they still print death notices like they are news, and they put them at common intersections because their population is older and not as connected online. So that is their form of finding out how people are not in the community anymore, which I thought was pretty interesting. I saw a couple and thought they were missing persons posters, and I was a little concerned. But in fact, they are just, that's how they spread their obituaries around. During the Civil War, we kind of shifted to this is vital information with the death notices. Our country was incredibly divided. You didn't necessarily know if your brother was okay, if your husband was okay, so this really became a form of staying informed and letting people know through a death notice versus an obituary. So we will get into the difference between them, but the Civil War really brought about not just the obituary, but the death notice itself. Once we kind of progressed, we got to the obituary form that we now know. Typically, this tells you not just the vital stats, which is what we call the biographical sketch, but it gives you the stories, and it hopefully gives you a sense of who that person is. My favorite types of obituaries are the ones that I read and I'm like, man, I wish I'd known that person. Those are the ones that really, really stick with me. Currently, you see obituaries anywhere and everywhere. Sometimes they're online, sometimes they're in the newspapers. You can pay a very hefty sum to have your obituary printed in the New York Times, if you so choose. It is not cheap. You do have to buy that space. It is ad space that they sell by the column inch. But you can print it, and there's not really any restrictions on where you get to choose to run it. Ultimately, the obituary has shifted a lot, and I think because of that, it gives down. Usually they're just like 1 or 2 sentences. So-and-so died on this day, funeral services to be held on these days, family being served by this funeral home. That's a death notice. Very simple, free, easy to put in, gets the word out. What is happening more and more is you get that free death notice, and it'll tell you what funeral home is serving that family, and then you can go to the funeral home's website, and that is where you will find the obituary, which was paid for in the funeral package and not a separate payment to the publication. So some people are not posting their obituaries in newspapers anymore. They're choosing to just stay with that. As someone who reads every patient's obituary that I can find, I will find you. I will. I will go to every funeral home website if I have to. But if it exists, I will hunt it down. So knowing that that's an option can sometimes make the cost less prohibitive, I think. The obituary itself does cost money, but it is a better snapshot of the person. And yes, it's still going to give you the vital stats of where the services are, when the services are. Typically they'll run after the death notice, but it's just a more robust version of it. The obituary basics is our next slide. This is what you're going to see in most obituaries, bar none. Typically, if you're seeing an obituary that follows just the biographical sketch, so we start with this person who was this age, lived here, died on this day, and then you go into the biographical sketch, who they were married to, when did they get married, who presided over the proceedings, which that always amazes me that they remember that. Where they went to school, when they graduated, did they serve in the military, what did they do for work, their children. When you get to just those basics, sometimes that's something that the funeral home has done for the family. If you're trying to write an obituary shortly after someone dies, you forget everything that came into your head. So sometimes the funeral home does pull that together. The problem is that funeral homes are very busy, and they don't have time to sit down and get to know the person the way that you or the person themselves would have known themselves. So there's nothing wrong with a very brief overview in an obituary, but just keep in mind that it doesn't have to be limited to just that biographical sketch. The obituary that's quoted on this slide for Miss Andrews, that is from our North Country Now publication. That is one of the best obituaries that I have read, and one of her daughters worked tirelessly on it. And when I called her to talk to her, I asked her if she wrote the obituary, and she started to cry. Because she did, and she worked so hard on it, and she was so proud of it, but nobody really knew what to say about it. Because, like, how do you say, sorry that your mom is dead, you did a great job on the obituary? I get to say that in my job. So that was lovely. You can find the gems right in our own publications. You can also find books and books of obituaries. A quick Google search will give you lists of really, really good ones. But you can find the good ones locally too. So it's not just the big stuff. The obituary basics usually include your family. If there's a falling out and you don't want to include Great Aunt Lucy, don't include Great Aunt Lucy. It's okay. What is she going to do? Be mad at you? Probably not. If she is, that sounds like a her problem. But if there are family members that you just don't want to include, you don't include them. I do firmly believe that you should always include your pets in your obituaries, if for no other reason than to give me something to ask the survivors about. The pets definitely have a place, and they're a pretty big part of most families. And then making sure that there's a sort of special touch, even if you don't go super, super personal, if there was a Bible verse that meant a lot to this person, if there was a song that they were forever quoting. My grandma used to say, and as her dementia got worse, would say a lot, life is a mystery, to pretty much anything. So we really did put that in there because we just didn't know what else to say about her. A lot of obituaries will also include, at the end, donations can be made in memory to X, Y, or Z. Usually at this point in time, I get asked if you have to include the person's age in their obituary. That is entirely at your discretion. If you would like to, that's fine. If you don't want your grandma to come back and haunt then you don't put it in there. And you let people do math if they want to do the math. But there's nothing that says you have to include that information. And there's nothing that says that you have to include how the person died. It's another question that we get asked a lot. There's no rule. You can include it or you don't have to. It's entirely up to you. There's a couple different reasons why you should write your own obituary. Ultimately, it is your story. So you get to tell the world what mattered to you. Nobody is going to know what mattered to you more than what you know. My irreverent friend in the corner here already identified this as the best reason to write your own obituary, which is that it is the best way to get the ultimate last word.
Yes.
You get to say exactly what you want to say, and there is no rebuttal to be heard. So there's something to be said for that. For me, one of the most important parts of writing my own obituary is that I get to select the photo that runs with it. So we have a coworker at hospice. It's just me. I have a coworker at hospice who absolutely cannot stand when an octogenarian's obit runs with their graduation picture from high school. Right? Like, you don't know how many times you've stood next to that woman in Price Dropper because you've never seen that woman before. So you get to pick the picture that runs. Does anyone know what picture they want to run with their obit? Yeah. Make sure your family knows that, or they'll pick the one that you don't want them to pick. It's another chance, the last chance really, to give people advice that you have probably been hammering into them for years, but they still refuse to do. Just one more chance. We're going to put it in their ear one more time. The other thing is that you get to ensure accuracy. So more and more people are finding their roots on things like Ancestry.com, and they're doing deeper dives into what their family history looks like. What is frustrating to those people is when they're going back, sometimes all they have is an obituary, and maybe the person's name was spelled wrong. I talked to some person who the date of death was wrong, and that was very disturbing to them because it was like years off. If you're writing your own obituary or you're writing it for someone else, you know the facts, and you get to put the facts in there, which means future generations will be left with less questions if they're trying to pull all the pieces together. So that can be very helpful. If you have that information, that can be helpful to keep in mind. I do get asked at this point, if I read someone's obit and I see a glaring error in it, like with a date or something, or a misspelling of the person who died's name, should I point that out? We've had a couple people call funeral homes to point that out to them, and they do change it on their website. Once it's run on a publication, it's harder to change, but you can certainly change it on a funeral home website or something like that. So truly, if I am referred to as Katie in my obituary, all of you need to call and say that she was not Katie, she was Kate. If you see your best friend's name is misspelled, call them and tell them. We did have an obituary where very busy person was doing the obituary, and the person who's dead, their name changed halfway through the obituary to somebody totally different. So thankfully, some well-meaning human picked up the phone, called them, and said, I think that's a mistake. And they did fix it, and they were very grateful for that. So it's not set in stone. You can still make corrections, which I think is very helpful. Before we go much further, questions? Okay. Now we're going to go back to our little cards. I want to know what your superpower is. We have a board member at hospice whose superpower is that she can select the right size Tupperware for the leftovers every single time. That is amazing to me. What are your superpowers? Write it down.
On which day of the week?
The day that ends in Y.
Okay.
It's a weird question. You never really think about it.
Oh, no, I have lots of superpowers.
That does not surprise me.
I just have to. Which one should I brag about? It's really good.
I do think my superpower, much to my mother's chagrin, is that I will board a transatlantic flight to just about anywhere in the world by myself and just do it. I've come back whole every time, so we're good. What other superpowers do we have in the room? Yes.
Knowledge of useless information.
Perfect. Knowledge of useless information. Awesome. What else?
Organizing?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I wanna know her.
Are you organizing like your whole house, or are you organizing everything? All the things?
I think everything, except my house.
Oh. That's a good skill.
Are you for rent?
No.
Just fine.
What other superpowers do we have? Nobody in here makes the best chocolate chip cookies.
Pie crust.
Pie, there, all right. Pie crust. I also make a very good one.
I did.
So thinking about something like what your superpower is another just easy jumping off point. And you don't even have to frame it in your obituary as I was the greatest pie crust maker in St. Lawrence County, maybe New York State, I don't know. You can just put it in there as a fun tidbit. Maybe, I don't know your first name, but maybe Bob here, his obituary wants to say that of all of the skills he had the most useless information about everything in the world. That was his skill. That's a good way to pull it in, and you wouldn't know that just looking at someone. So this gives you a good kind of jumping off point. The other question that I really like is, what is something that you've done that you're proud of? We don't get to brag about ourselves very often in this culture. There is something that you're proud of. Even if it's graduating from high school, even if it's walking across the stage at your kindergarten graduation. What's something you're proud of? Does anyone want to share? That's my favorite one. Are you gonna share?
Sure, I feel like I'm talking fast.
You're fine.
Running in and completing a half marathon when I was 61 years old.
Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. Were you being chased? No, because that's
Yeah, but if anybody has ever done them, the crowds along the way just keep you going. It's phenomenal.
oh,
And the other runners.
yeah.
It's really an experience.
Huh. That's cool. What else are we proud of? Anyone super proud of the fact that they worked for a specific company for X number of years? That doesn't happen nowadays. For decades and decades. Another fun one, especially if you had a really long marriage, a really good marriage, how did you meet your spouse? Is that a fun story? I want the bullet points in your obituary. Did anyone meet their spouse in like a really weird way? No. Yeah? How'd you meet?
Well, it was quite interesting. I was here student teaching. My friend and I took all of our materials and walked down to Morrison Park. While we were down there were these fellows who came by in a boat and kept on asking us if we wanted to go for a ride in the boat, which we said no to multiple times. They finally gave up, but then they came by with a vehicle and asked us the same question. And after asking us 2 or 3 times, I finally said, okay, where do you want to go? Take us to church. He took us to St. Mary's Cathedral. Neither one of us was Catholic at that point. We duck into the cathedral. We look out the door to make sure that they aren't around. And then we walk very carefully back to where we stayed. However, the caveat was my husband lived around the corner from where we stayed. Oh, plus he was also a bartender at Oscar's. And back then that was a real jumping place.
always loved yours.
Good line. Good line.
These are my brother, he did play
Clever.
after baseball team,
Mine do.
and my brother insisted that I go. He wanted me to introduce him. There you
So
go.
put the fun ones in there, the fun stories that maybe just your family knows. The daredevil getting in the vehicle with the strange person. Goodness. Just something fun, especially if your spouse and your marriage was like a huge part of your life. That can be a fun way to pull people in and to give your family something to really grab onto. Because they're going to remember hearing that story probably 18 times. Or, conversely, it will be the very first time they've heard this story, and they're a little appalled, but also very impressed that you got
I
it
had
wrong.
one. It wasn't where I met my husband because we went to high school together, but later on, towards our senior year, he broke his back in a car accident. So he was in the hospital here, straight on his back, for 6 weeks. So they always said, I used to go up and visit him. They always used to, his family always said he couldn't run away from me.
That belongs in an obituary. What was the funniest thing that happened to you in your 20s? Did you do something real silly that maybe shaped the rest of your life, but you didn't tell your family about it? Did you do something really silly that shaped the rest of your life and your family's heard about it every single day since? Did you decide on a whim one day to join the Peace Corps and you were gone for 6 years? Sometimes people, like, at this point in their life, when they're looking back on it, they like to tell the stories about when they were learning to drive and they backed into the closed garage door that their mother had told them repeatedly not to back into. That's always fun. Are there funny stories from your 20s that you're like, oh, I don't know if I put that in an obituary, but that one's funny? And then I think for the majority of people, if you're going to put anything in your obituary that's not just directed at your family, that's directed at the community as a whole, especially if you have known this community and you've been active in this community, what piece of advice do you want to give them? What do you want them to know? One last time from you. Does anyone know what the piece of advice would be already? Yeah?
Yeah, I would say participate in your community, be active in your community, you know, that's where you live.
That's a good one. We need more third spaces in the U.S. We have a lot of work and home existence, and we need third spaces. So that's a good one. Anyone else have advice that they know right off the bat is what's going in there? So once we get kind of the starter questions out of the way, it gives you an idea of what kind of stories you want to tell, what language you want to use. We get to the strategies that make an obituary really special. The first of which is to write it in the first person. So this obituary was a recent one, and she wrote it in the first person, and it just starts right off. It hurts me to admit it, but I, Mrs. Ron Hicks from Baysville, have passed away. So we got who died and where they lived all in the first sentence. Fabulous. I passed peacefully with my eldest daughter Brenda by my side. I leave behind my loving husband Ron Hicks, who I often affectionately refer to as a horse's ass. Yes, you can in fact swear to a degree in obituaries. That is okay. I also left behind my children, whom I tolerated over the years. Bob with Carol, my oldest son, and also my favorite. Do we think maybe Bob wrote this obituary? That would be my guess. Brian with Jeanette, who was the Oreo cookie favorite. Brenda, aka Hazel, who would run to clean the bathrooms when she heard company was coming. Maybe she's also very organized. Barbara with Gordon, the ever Miss Perfect, and finally baby Bruce, who wouldn't eat homemade turkey soup because he didn't want to be alert for bones while he ate. I didn't know turkey soup was a thing until I read this obituary. Thank you all for sharing my life with me. I'm off to swim to the buoy and back. You got the vital stats. You know who it was, you know that she passed peacefully, you know who her family was, and you get a sense of who she was. Do you think you could write your obituary in the first person? I've tried. remember being very little, and we would sit at the table and we would read the obituaries as you do, and she would always say, you know, it's a good day if you're reading the obituaries and not in the obituaries.
Yeah.
So when I started to pen her obituary, what I really wanted my opening sentence to be is, it's a good day for you, it's a bad day for me, because I'm in the obituaries and you're reading them. Just finding some sort of, if you can do it in the first person, that's always really funny, especially if you're one of those really outgoing, vivacious people. People kind of expect that from you. Another really easy way to make it special is to share a humorous story. So anything that's humorous, anything that made your entire family laugh. Mr. Ladouceur, his obituary also ran in North Country Now not that long ago. In his 81 years, Frank Ladouceur taught us many things. He always warned us of the dangers of taking NyQuil. It will give you nightmares. He showed us all that hot dog soup was the best meal in the world. I don't know what hot dog soup is. I'm a little afraid to ask. He got us hooked on his homemade marshmallow frosted cakes. Most importantly, Frank taught us how to love unconditionally. Oh, and we all learned from him how to have a wicked and sarcastic sense of humor. So I don't know what kind of person Frank was, but he definitely made his family laugh. If there's a funny story that you've told over and over again in your family, even if it's only going to resonate with your family members when they read it, put it in the obituary. It's okay. Especially if your version of that funny story differs from other people's versions.
Yeah.
A lot of times people think that it's going to take pages and pages and paragraphs to capture the essence of who they were in the obituary. It doesn't have to. You can make it very short and sweet. This is the entire obituary for Daniel Jackson Moore. It's 3 paragraphs, and it's in its entirety. Daniel Jackson Moore, 63, passed away on July 6, 2020 from an unexpected heart attack. Even though a failing heart took him away from this world, his loving heart left a beacon of light for all in the community. Daniel is survived by his beautiful wife, Jada. He was a proud papa to 2 daughters, Alexis and Brianna. His cheerful attitude and bright smile will be missed at the high school where he worked in the counseling department. A short graveside ceremony will be held on Friday, July 10, 2020 at the city cemetery, followed by a backyard reception and potluck barbecue. You got all you needed in 3 paragraphs. So it doesn't have to be the Iliad, right? We don't need to write the next great American novel as your obituary. If you would like to, go for it. But it can be short and sweet. The benefit to it being short and sweet is, again, you do have to pay for the obituary to run. So if you're a very verbose human, short and sweet is going to cost you less money. A really easy way to cut space when you start writing your obituaries is if you're going to include the surviving spouses or the surviving children and their spouses, don't put the last names in. We don't need the last names. Just put them in parentheses. Saves you some space and words. The other thing is you don't necessarily need to put what state. If they died in Messina and you're reading it in North Country Now, save the space and don't put New York. We know where they likely were. So there's some little tweaks to making it shorter, but truly it doesn't need to be a huge undertaking. It can be short and sweet. The other big thing is if there was a certain theme that kind of ran through this person's life, and when you thought about them or when people thought about you, was there always a theme that they came back to? This snippet from this obituary, this was a very long obituary, but he had an irrepressible desire to experience life to his fullest. Sometimes that meant dragging family and friends to obscure restaurants or museums, only to have them leave with new enthusiasm and lots of pictures. He could walk out of any venue he entered with, if not some sort of prize, at least a friend or 2. Do we all know that person that can make a friend wherever they go? And they always can talk to whoever. It's amazing. Daniel brought people together, basking in the delight of sharing something new or absurd. Brilliant, hilarious, steadfast, present. The world misses him already. He sounds lovely. But just, if they were the kind of person that could make friends with anybody, put it in their obituary, because chances are somebody is going to look at that man's picture or see his name and be like, oh, I did talk to him at Alex's that one day. The last way that we think it's easy to make it special when you're talking to share the highlights reel, not the resume. Too often I read obituaries where I get to know that entire person's work history and would definitely interview them to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but I don't know what kind of person they were at home. I don't know that they were 6'5" and left behind 2 chihuahuas because they love chihuahuas and had chihuahuas their entire life. I just know they were a really hard worker, which is good, but there is more to your life than just your career. And I think it's very easy to stick to the concrete and the basics, but you are more than that. So if you look at it from a highlights reel perspective and not like you're writing a resume, that can be incredibly helpful. You may start with their resume because their career may have been truly one of the most impactful parts of their lives, but there was more to them outside those walls. And if they did spend a lot of time at work, maybe ask their coworkers, what were they like at work? Maybe they were a totally different person than they were at home. Maybe they were hilarious at work, and at home, they never laughed. So find a way to focus on not just the job history, because it's truly very easy to do that, but there's more to it than just that. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Truly being able to select whatever picture you choose to run with your obituary is going to have a lasting impact. This is the picture that will run with my obituary. I am dancing with reckless abandon on a cliff in Italy. I know for a fact this is not a picture anyone in my family would have picked because you can't see my face. But that is the picture I have selected. Hopefully we don't all see it in North Country now shortly. But you can pick the picture, and even if you don't know where to start with adjectives that describe you or superpowers that you had or things that you did that left a mark on the world, tell the story of the picture. Why did you pick that picture? What does that picture say about you? That right there gives you a jumping off point. Like, that's great. Does anyone, some of you do know what picture you're picking, right? Is there a story behind the picture? That's also one of my favorite questions to ask when I call people. They look so happy in that picture. When was it taken? And inevitably, whoever I'm talking to is able to tell me about the wedding, or the fact that it was the surprise baby shower, or that it was the coming home party for the nephew. There's always a story that goes with whatever picture you pick. You can pick the very traditional high school graduation photo if you so choose, but picking a unique picture gives you an easier way to make a really robust obituary. It's a great story to have. And it gives me something to ask when I call. Timing is everything. I don't think any of us are here tonight with the thought that we're gonna, go home and write our entire obituary and have it run in the paper in the next 6 months. So an aspirational obituary could be something you wanna consider. I have 2 obituaries on my computer. I have one as if I were to die on my way home tonight, and I have one as if I were to die when I was 100 years old. Hopefully I hit all the countries that I have listed in that aspirational one. It's a long list, but either way, I know that my story gets told my way, and you can update them, you can change them. There are some things that I think remain the same in everyone's obituaries: who you're survived by, your pets, what you love to do, where your favorite place was. Some of the stuff is going to remain the same, but update it. If you write it ahead of time, update it when more things change. You don't want to be the grandma or grandpa that leaves out that one new grandbaby because you wrote the obituary too soon. Update it. And please don't do all the work of writing your own obituary and not tell your kids or your surviving people where it is, because that would really be unfortunate. If you have never, has anybody written an obituary for someone else? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Did you know you were going to have to do it? Yeah.
I didn't think it was that hard.
Good.
Yeah, and if you know somebody and you love them, even if you love that, it comes down to
That's true. Yep. If you have never done it, it can be helpful to write an obituary for someone who is already dead. It can also be incredibly helpful to write an obituary for a pet who has died. My obituary for my cat was gold, and it made multiple hospice nurses tear up. I was very proud of it. But if you don't know where to start and you're not really sure what it would even also write your own, and there is really no right or wrong. It is your story. It's entirely what you want to leave with people. It's the mark that you get to leave your last bit of advice to the world. So write it yourself. Tell someone what you definitely want included in it, because that's going to be your last shot. The second handout is the biographical sketch. So that just gives you an outline of what we typically see in the biographical sketch. Again, there are certain things that if you don't want to include them in the obituary, you don't have to. If you want to leave out people, that's okay. It is entirely your choice. This is just a smaller, more condensed version of everything we have gone over, and it's not a formula. I don't want to see a bunch of obituaries following this exact formula. That would be a little awkward. But it's just a good place to start, and it's a nice map if you've never done it. Questions? Did I overwhelm people? Oh,
Very nice. Good idea.
yeah, and you can write your obituary, or you can write an obituary for someone and have them look at it before they die. That's always helpful, unless you want to say not nice things. But like my mom has seen hers, so she had her input. I don't know if it'll stay in there. Question?
Not a question, but it would be very special, I think, to have a relationship with a parent where you talked about this and found out from them what they wanted. Because I wrote my mom's, it's the only one I've ever done, and I found myself thinking, I don't know that much about what she was like when she was young at all. Not a clue.
I think a lot of people just give the information to the funeral home and they just fill in the blanks.
And if there's not a plan in place, and that's just your plan of action in that moment of intense grief, that is okay. That is okay. But if you're able to have those open conversations ahead of time, and you do get to know your parent as a person and not just your parent, which is weird, you get to write about them. And truly, a quick one done by a funeral home captures all the good stuff, like the vital stats. But if you want to be able to express to people who maybe don't come to services and don't hear the eulogies, the obituary is the place to do that.
Well, and I think that's a good point. There is a difference between the eulogy and the obituary.
Yes.
And I like the idea of us creating our own obituary, because it is our final last day, and it's what we want people to know was important about what we felt about our life. The eulogy, I'd like to be around to hear all that nice stuff, but, it's not gonna happen. So, we get this opportunity to put our best foot forward, whether it's in an irreverent way or a straightforward way. I think it's great. And my son knows